Hey guys, it's Lindsay with another installment of Dreadfully Yours. We are already on episode 4, and this one is called Blades of Grass. It is exclusively a Vanessa and John episode. The creature, or John Clare, depending on if you prefer to call him by his name. We don't actually know what his real name is, as he didn't end up giving it in this episode, which I thought was quite interesting. But yeah, so this episode was strictly kind of a Vanessa flashback episode, which has become a tradition on this show, actually. We have had, in the first season, we had a flashback episode to Vanessa in the asylum, and then in season 2, we had the Cutwife episode that was also a flashback. So it is not uncommon for us. I think it's officially a tradition for us to have a flashback episode to tell us the story of... Sorry, my cat. Marjorie, stop. Officially have a flashback episode every season. I think we might actually get a flashback episode twice, or, partially a flashback episode this season of Ethan, perhaps. I'm curious if we're going to get a flashback to actually how he turned into a werewolf. I'm not quite sure, but this episode was purely Vanessa-centric. We open up, and before I get started, the episode is called Blades of Grass, and it's mentioned multiple times in this episode. And if any of you were curious, it is a quote by Thomas Carlyle, who was a Scottish philosopher who died in 1881. And the full quote is, "To us also, through every star, through every blade of grass," "To us also, through every star, through every blade of grass, is not God made visible if we will only open our minds and our eyes." So I think that actually is really, really fitting to who Vanessa is and how Vanessa feels, especially at this point in the this episode, especially because she still has her faith in this episode in the flashback. Obviously, she doesn't have her faith as much in the current timeline, but at this point in the show, in this flashback, she did. Interesting to note, Thomas Carlyle, once a Christian, he lost his faith while he was attending college, but he eventually adopted a form of deism. And if you don't know anything about deism, it's also known, they believe in a clockwork god, which is basically, to summarize it and give very, very oversimplification, they believed that God created Earth, all of the creatures on it, everything, and basically left it. So everything that happens on Earth isn't God's doing, God's, fault or anything like that. So God never necessarily meant for anything to happen. He created Earth, but left us to our own devices. So that's kind of why they call it the clockwork god. He kind of made it, set up a little time clock, and then was like, peace out. Have a good time, guys. And so I think that's kind of an interesting concept, and I think that kind of also fits very much into the philosophy almost of the show, because while we have seen the devil and we are getting, Lucifer, we have Lucifer and we have Dracula and we have all these elements of evil, we really don't have an active God or angels or anything like that. There are no positive spiritual elements acting in any sort of way. Sure, we have good witches, we have daywalkers, but they don't seem to have any direct line to God or anything like that. Like, obviously, like, Lucifer has a direct line to hell, and the witches have a direct line to Lucifer, but it doesn't seem like there's anything going on. God's not answering anybody's prayers. He's definitely not answering Vanessa's, that's for sure. So I think that's a very interesting idea to touch on. I just wanted to give you guys a little background on that quote and a little background on the guy who said it, and before I got into it. So we started out the episode. Vanessa is still hypnotized by Dr. Stewart, and she claims that she barely spoke to the orderly that was in the room, and she was in the room for 5 months, and that that the orderly, and I'm going to call him John for the sake of this review. John is the only person who ever came and visited her, and Seward basically gets her to describe John, and finally she gets a full description, and we get the reveal of John. Obviously, Vanessa's in a really bad spot. We get to see Vanessa as she was in the episode Closer Than Sisters. Completely a mess, clawing at the walls, kind of groaning at herself. Just a complete and utter mess. Almost catatonic, I would say. John brings her food, and obviously Vanessa leaves it untouched. And she refuses to eat it. Obviously, just completely not wanting to live. John wants her to eat, and she refuses, and he implores her to, tells her that if she doesn't, he will have to force feed her. And as I had mentioned in my previous review, like the suffragettes had been force fed, and here's a direct example of what force feeding looks like. Interestingly enough, I keep mentioning things in prior reviews, and they keep popping up in the episodes afterwards. So that's what force feeding looks like. It's a horrible, terrible thing. It's a complete violation of your, body autonomy, and it's just gross. I feel really bad for her, but, it's obviously something that's being forced on her, and John at the time thinks it's something that he needs to do to help treat her, that's what's required of him to help with the treatment, because he thinks he's doing something good at the time. I think that, again, she also talks at the time, she talks about how she wants to die and that she was touched by Satan, and he obviously isn't real believing of that, and she keeps trying to engage him in conversation, and he's not allowed to. I also think it's really interesting that John has no hair, and obviously he's going bald. Did Victor give him, like, a hair transplant or something? Like, is he wearing somebody else's skull? Or, scalp or something? I'm curious about that. Because, obviously, like, John Clare, the creature, has way more hair and almost a different scalp than John the human. So, what's up with that? So basically, like I said, she ends up being force-fed. And again, she ends up trying to engage him in conversation, and it doesn't really work. She starts trying to goad him, and it doesn't work. And she basically says, "You think I'm a spoiled bitch?" And that seems to get a little bit of a rise out of him. And she ends up getting hydrotherapy, which we also saw in Closer Than Sisters. So basically, we're getting to see a lot of the aftermath of the therapies that she went through during Closer Than Sisters. And I want to make a break here and talk about some of the asylum techniques, the horrible things that went on in the insane asylums, and techniques that they went through in the insane asylums for women in particular. So a lot of you are aware that women were sent to insane asylums, not just for insanity back then. Obviously, like, a lot of the people in Bedlam, as Jekyll pointed out, they may not have been insane at the time, but they certainly became insane while they were there. And women in particular could be put in insane asylums for things that had nothing to do with insanity. Women, there are well-documented cases, especially in the Victorian era, of women being sent there for epilepsy, being sent there for infidelity, basically like cheating on their husbands, and then their husbands would send them to the insane asylum. Depression, being loudmouth, basically doing anything that was out of the social norms could get you sent to an insane asylum. If you stepped out of line, you were in danger of being sent to an insane asylum by your parents. Now, this could happen regardless of what your social class was. and it didn't really matter. Now, given if you committed a crime, you would be sent to a worse insane asylum. But if you had money, your parents might send you to an insane asylum. That was a little bit better if they thought that, oh, you had like the hysterics, which were the women problems. Like, obviously, if they felt you were hypersexual or you were acting out in a way that they felt was associated with like a woman problem. Non-conformity, things like that. One of the things that they used to treat hysteria was mercury. So we all know now that mercury ends up driving people insane. There are a lot of things that mercury does, but it basically degrades your brain and drives you bonkers. So a lot of people, women who are being treated with hysteria, were being treated with mercury, so it made them insane. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And obviously, a lot of the, in general, a lot of the medicines that they were being treated with were highly toxic. A lot of the women were being treated with low levels of arsenic, which is deadly, and so a lot of women died from that. They also got treated with something called antimony, which is a toxic chemical, which is now currently used in fire retardants. And it was employed to keep female patients in a constant state of nausea, which obviously made them less violent. And so the doctors would give these women chemicals to make them constantly want to vomit so that they wouldn't be violent anymore. And restraints were also highly used on women, which obviously we'll talk about a little bit more when Vanessa gets restrained. But yeah, restraints were used quite a bit with women. Interestingly enough, when I was doing my research, I recovered a piece written by a Victorian doctor that was part of a premier asylum in Victorian England, who said that women tended to have to be restrained more because women tended to be more difficult to deal with than men. So even if women tended to be more violent than men when they were insane. So women had to be restrained more. So it tended to be the women who were restrained more than men in these insane asylums, apparently. Go figure. Another thing that I found dealing with the lobotomies was there was a report that on the lobotomies that they found at, for example, at Westminster Hospital, that it was noted that the majority of patients suffered side effects from the lobotomies, such as reduced capacity to learn and an inability to deal with situations that required quick or alternate planning. And women were subjected to the lobotomies more frequently. They found that about 75% of the women that went into these insane asylums ended up getting a lobotomy in the end, which is huge. This was a small sample of the report I was finding, but that's a big deal. And it was very, very popular with male doctors over women. And actually, there were a lot of people who questioned the use of the lobotomy technique because it's so invasive and it has such lasting damage. But a lot of men chose that as one of their first techniques to use on women, especially because it made them so docile. So very, very interesting stuff on the Victorian techniques in dealing with the mentally ill. So back to our story. After the hydrotherapy, John brings Vanessa a blanket. Obviously, he's feeling pretty bad for her, but he ends up having to take the blanket away. Very interesting that he gives it to her and has to take it away from her. I wonder if the blanket went missing and he had to cover for it and have to take it back from her. She obviously gets very, very upset about it, calls him very cruel, and then attacks him, scratches his face up, and just is an utter dejected mess. Obviously, she is at her lowest point. Again, she calls it torture, he calls it science, but it's clear that she is finally getting through to him bit by bit. And she tells him that all of this is supposed to make her normal, like all the women that he knows, blind, like a cog in an intricate social machine. And that's not who she is, and that's not who she wants to be. And it's just a beautiful little statement there. And it's very, very interesting when you hear her talking about it like that she doesn't want to be this cog in this intricate social machine, because that is exactly what Lily's fighting against. That she doesn't want to be a cog in this social machine, and that she doesn't want to be what the men want her to be, but they're fighting it in very, very different ways. Obviously, there's a part of Vanessa that still very much wants to fit in and still wants to have some form of acceptance, and obviously Lily is just completely bucking that trend completely. Obviously, they come from very different lives, and they both have been abused in different ways, but Lily obviously has just reached a point where she just wants to murder all the men. And while there are parts of Vanessa, like Amunet, who wants to destroy people, at the core, like true Vanessa isn't after that. Vanessa's looking for acceptance of who she truly is without resorting to any kind of violence or anything like that, as opposed to Lily, who doesn't care if anybody accepts her. She just wants to rule and dominate, and they'll accept her or not. You know, they'll accept her or they'll be dead. And Vanessa doesn't want that, obviously. It'll be very interesting if they meet. And I think it's, they talk, John ends up mentioning his son. Again, we don't get any names, but it's a really, really touching scene. The chemistry between the two actors, between John and Vanessa, is just so compelling. You can definitely see the mirroring of the scenes between the two of them from last season, and the way that their friendship kind of could have grown in the asylum. It's beautiful. And then his eyes go black, and he becomes Lucifer. And she freaks out, obviously. He leaves, and she's freaking out, trying to get out of the dream, basically begging Dr. Seward to let her out. And Dr. Seward says that she's in a fugue state, and that she's been burning her, trying to do everything she can to get Vanessa out of this dream, but she has no way to wake Vanessa up. The only way Vanessa is going to wake up is when Vanessa wants to wake up. So this is something Vanessa needs to do for herself. It's a spirit journey. Vanessa is in this until her body and her mind decide that this is, she's done. But Dr. Seward is in the dream with her, which I think is really, really cool. Vanessa, they do talk about the fact that, Dr. Seward is between worlds, and Vanessa's between worlds, between her mind, the past and the present, which is very fitting because Vanessa's between two worlds anyway. She's in the demi-monde, and she's always been in the demi-monde. And so it's perfect that she can exist within this, and Dr. Seward can exist in this with her. And there's just a beautiful scene that Dr. Seward says she won't leave her, and that she's with her no matter what, and she won't leave her no matter anything, and that, asks her what Joan would say, and Vanessa says, be true. And Dr. Seward says, well, just, do that, and I'll be here no matter what. And I'm going to tell you guys, I cried a lot during this entire episode. I kept having to pause while I was taking notes and cry, because it's really hard for me to watch Vanessa be this destroyed and this abject and just suffering. And Eva Green is just so good at doing this. And it's just heartbreaking to see someone just so destroyed and at their very lowest, trying to struggle with not only who they are, but with what a complete burden they have on themselves. Being touched by God is one thing, but being touched by Satan is a whole other thing. And with no one else believing her, and being trapped in a room where she can't tell if it's day or night, it's an utterly desperate thing. And Vanessa, Eva Green does an amazing job of making you truly believe it. So the next time we see her, she's gagged, and she's obviously been a little drugged, and looks just gross. And John comes to visit her and brings makeup and a brush and a mirror from home, and brushes her hair, puts makeup on her, and starts reading poetry to her, and tells her about his wife, and her name is Marjorie, so we know his wife's name now. And that says that after all that he's seen, that what they're doing to Vanessa is torture, and he knows that now, and that he would leave if he didn't need the work, but he also wouldn't leave her, and that if he could, they would walk out together, and that's what he truly would want. And he says that, he isn't big on poetry, but he finds this book that he has for his son, and it's very, very simple poetry, but he reads it to Vanessa, and it's, again, just one of this amazing, touching scene, and the writing on this show is just so good. And he tells her, at the end that, hopefully, like, when you get out of here, no one will ever put makeup on your face again, and no one will ever do anything that you don't want. No one will ever put makeup on you again. No one will ever touch you if you don't want them to. And it's kind of interesting that he's come to this revelation that even in him, helping her see that she can still be pretty and all of this stuff, that he is reinforcing what she doesn't want. And he realizes that and is almost angry at himself and helps remove the makeup and apologizes for what he's done. And, obviously he has to put the gag back in her mouth and tells her it's Christmas. And that's heartbreaking. And then the next interesting scene, and I was a little worried about this, like, Vanessa, you're in danger, girl, like, stop. Vanessa mentions that she's lonely, and that every last thing she's done is going to be the last thing. Like, every last kiss is her last kiss, and she's only been with one man. And she gets naked and hugs him and then kisses him, and he kisses her back, but he, like, immediately pushes her off and goes away. And then, like, thank God, like, Vanessa, I love you, but you're a mess. Like, I get it. Like, it's hard, but you're associating friendship and need for human contact with something else completely. And I think he understood that too. But he listens to her and she says that I should have died a virgin like Joan of Arc, and she sang on the pyre and things like that. So again, we're bringing it back to the whole Joan of Arc thing. And I think it's very interesting. She's never mentioned Joan of Arc before until this season, and she mentioned Joan of Arc with Dracula, Dr. Sweet. And I wonder if that was her subconscious almost remembering this scene without her really realizing it, or it's just an allusion back to this. And John is obviously getting really frustrated with her and just so upset that she's just not making any progress, because he knows how bad things can get if she doesn't make any progress. And he asks, why is it so important for you to be different? Why can't you just pretend for a while and pretend not to be different? And of course, she brings up his son and says, hey, would you want your son to be anything other than he is? And John says, no, I want him to be happy. And Vanessa says, but what if he isn't? And John's like, hey, you got me there. Like, and I think that's another one of their really big breakthroughs. Again, this episode is so well written and so well contained that even though it's really only these two people, and sure, we get a little bit of Dr. Seward, there doesn't need to be anything else. These two actors do such an amazing job in one single set piece that it's like watching a one-act play being put on a stage. Like, it's that engaging and arresting, and it's just beautiful, and watching these two characters play off each other, and their, them coming to the realizations about each other, and John really realizing, like, what's going on in this hospital, and, like, who Vanessa really is, and Vanessa coming to understand that John is not like other people, and he's not a bad man, and that he has kindness and things like that. It's just lovely. And we get to one of the best scenes in this entire piece. And in another little meeting between them, John asks Vanessa, why would the devil be interested in you? And she says, I don't know. And then he says, well, that's easy because I'm in love with you. And dun dun dun, he's back to being Lucifer again. And this is one of the best things we've seen. We really haven't had a lot of we haven't had a lot of them interacting. Like, yes, we had the Lucifer talking to Vanessa through the doll and things like that in season 1, and we had Lucifer talking to Vanessa through Ethan's personification and through Sir Malcolm's personification in season 1 as well. But to me, this scene is the first time they really have this confrontation, and there's nowhere to run for her. In the other 2 scenes, technically, she could have gotten away. There was a bedroom door. She could have left. But here, there's nowhere for her to run. And this is before she really had any clue of her capabilities or anything like that besides, her work with Joan. And there's this great scene with this shadow snake that comes out and curls around her, and she freaks out. And the snake, Lucifer, the snake, he is the snake, says that, where is God, and that you're not even a blade of grass to him, and that you are like the old gods, and be what you are and what you always were. And she's being drawn in by him, obviously, and they're on the floor, and they're really just pulling her into this. And obviously, he's calling to her, and it's really just pulling at her soul. But before she can fully say yes or anything like that, we hear another, and bum bum bum, here we go. We all knew what was supposed to be coming in this episode, that she was supposed to have met met Dracula in this room. So when we turn around, there is another John, but instead of having the black eyes that Lucifer has, that we've always associated with Lucifer and the devil, he has red eyes. And interestingly enough, Lucifer is terrified of him. So we've had 2 seasons where we've had to deal with the devil, who obviously has been a formidable foe, and the devil is terrified of Lucifer. So if the devil's terrified I keep saying the devil, Lucifer. If the devil is terrified of Dracula, we should be too, because obviously, the devil's way more, Dracula is way more powerful than the devil. The devil cowers in a corner. Lucifer is cowering in this corner while Dracula is just advancing on him and saying that, I control the land and I am the beast. I have the capability. I'm the father of beasts, and you can read my name on my tomb. And he's so much more refined and confident in himself. And while the devil has been so soft-spoken and slow seduction, there's something so much more confident about Dracula and something so much more assertive about who he is. And while the snake that shadow snake was with Lucifer, with the devil, we have the shadow bats with Dracula. And I think it's really interesting that Lucifer, the devil says that Dracula is more beast than spirit. He's the wolf, the scorpion. And then Dracula says that Vanessa is the wolf and the scorpion. So the wolf, interesting. Think about that with Ethan, but apparently Vanessa's the wolf, so maybe we don't need the other wolf, but who knows. So very interesting. So we do know the true dichotomy of what's going on here now. So Lucifer is after Vanessa's soul, while Dracula is after her body, her lust, her body, basically. He wants what she is now, and Lucifer wants what she will become, what she is later, her soul. And Dracula's like, I don't need her soul, I don't want her soul, I want her as she is now. You can have her soul, whatever. I think it's really, really interesting. And Vanessa is obviously so much more taken in with Dracula, or so it seems. I was really, really concerned, and he's just pulling her neck back, and it seems like she's totally going to give in to the bite. But right before she gives in, she pulls herself back into a corner and says that she sees them both so clearly now, and she sees them as the two brothers, but she is promised to God. And then she starts, she says that they start saying that they're going to unleash horrors on her, and that they're going to unleash horrors, terrors. Her entire life is going to be hell until they get a hold of her. And she says, fine, let it. I don't care. I am nothing more than a blade of grass. And then she starts floating and starts chanting in the ancient language. And so, it seems she truly is Amunet. And Amunet is not maybe necessarily who we all expected to be. And I want to break in here now to talk a little bit about Amunet, because I haven't, like I said, as you guys know, I haven't really gone back to talk about the other two seasons. And I'm not going to have time to go back and do the other two seasons for some time, until the end of the season 3. And I will eventually want to go back, but until then, I just don't have time. So I want to talk a little bit about Amunet really quick. So she is the female hidden one, but it basically is just, so the name Amun, who is Amunet's husband, the name Amun means hidden one. And so Amunet just means female hidden one. So it's just basically a female version of Amun's name. Very little is known about her, but it's always been tied up in Amun. We don't really know where she originated. We don't know a lot about her. Her cult center was in Karnak, where she later started to become merged with Neith. Interestingly enough, I think a lot of what the show might be pulling from with her may be tied in with Neith a lot. It would be very interesting to talk to John Logan about this, because Neith is very interesting within herself, and if she is, since she was they tried to smash her and Amunet together into one coherent god eventually. It makes a lot of sense that Amunet would be a lot like, Amunet on the show would be a lot more like Neith, the Neith Amunet mashup. Because Neith herself fits in a lot with this Amunet show myth. She was the goddess of war, but she was also associated with primeval time and the daily recreation. She basically was considered to be one of the first, there's a quote in ancient Egyptian that says she was born the first in the time when there as yet had been no birth. So she's considered one of the very first gods, and one of the most powerful. She birthed Ra. She's a god, one of the goddesses of war, and she's also a goddess of rebirth. She helped create Egypt, and so she is very, very instrumental in a lot of things. And so she has a lot more power and she's very, very complicated and has a lot of different roles, and could be very, very feared in a lot of ways. She actually got to choose who ended up ruling between like Horus and some other god, I can't remember, but she was the one who ended up making the decision, because she was one of the first gods. As I said, she was the one born the first. So that almost ties in with what is happening here, that she is able to banish both of them because she has so much capability and so much power. And so after this scene happens, we blink back, and it's all in Vanessa's head, apparently. Or an illusion, and we blink back to John asking, why is the devil so interested in you? And she asks, hey, I need to sleep, because obviously what just happened. And Dr. Stewart says, hey, you can come out. Obviously we found out what we needed to find out, but Vanessa says, hey, not yet. I have more to find out. And here's one of the other scenes that I cried at. And the final scene one of the final scenes we have, or the final scene in the White Room, is John and Vanessa right before Vanessa is going to get her lobotomy. And John explains what is going to happen to her. And he starts crying and says, or I'm sorry, he explains what's going to happen to her, and that, you know, these lobotomies are horrible, and she explains that she tried to be normal, but it didn't work, because she said, you know, I believe in, you know, God's glory lives in all of us, and obviously they think that means she's crazy. He explains that he's quitting, but after he sees her off. And he also tells her that his son was asking him all these different questions, and about, you know, while they were building the ship model that we've seen, and that he was asking her about, you know, they were talking about what if people live above the Arctic, you know, up above Scotland, and he says that it's too cold for anybody to live there, and he started crying, and he said started crying, and he said he realized he was wrong, because there is one person who lives up there, even though it's really cold and lonely, and it was her. And I'm sorry, I'm crying again, because it was that touching to me. Obviously, Vanessa touched John's life that much, and obviously she's crying, and one of the best lines of the show, I think, this season, he says that before she goes off to surgery, the last person you see before your surgery will be someone who loves you. And kudos to this show. Like, really, these two people who don't remember each other, like, obviously, like, Vanessa remembers him now, but it's amazing to me that, you know, these two people who didn't remember each other from before what happened in this room. Vanessa obviously had blocked all of this out, and John had no memory of what he was as a human, as he was a creature. Found each other in that tuberculosis clinic area, under the ground, and still were able to reach out to each other and make such an amazing connection in season 2. And so no matter what, it's almost like they're always being drawn together, and they're supposed to be friends, because whatever's in their soul that's missing and is asking to be a balm for each other. And I think it's so important. And again, their friendship and this is so important to me, and I'm so glad that we found out that Vanessa didn't kill him. I had said in the last video that I thought that she was going to kill him, and it's great that she didn't, because after this, I was getting teary-eyed, but I really hope she seeks him out, because, and, maybe seeks out his family and tries to help his son, because their friendship is one of the most important things, I think, on this show, one of the best, pure, non-tainted things, especially now that we know how it started. And Vanessa needs someone like him in her life, because he obviously cares about her so much, regardless of what form she's in, and she obviously cares about him, and they deserve to have they deserve to be each other's support structure, basically. And obviously it could all go to shit because of this show, but I think it's really, really important that they seek each other out, and I'm really, really looking forward to the scene where Vanessa sees him again in the current time period. So, Vanessa, before Vanessa wakes up from her little dream, she gives him a chase kiss, which mirrors the one that we saw at the end of season 2. Again, beautiful. And then Vanessa wakes up. There are all of these cylinders sitting around. She's got the burn on her hand from where Dr. Seward tried to wake her up. And Seward gets her a drink and says, do you remember, what do you remember? And Vanessa says, I remember everything. And you said that if you name things, it makes you less scared, so I'm not frightened, and his name is Dracula. And that's where it ends. So, hell yeah, Vanessa is, ready to own things. So, I had been worried I'd been talking in other episodes that Vanessa needed someone to help her deal with Dracula. And sure, I still think Vanessa needs someone to help her deal with Dracula, because Dracula seems way more powerful than Lucifer or the devil, ever was. So I think she needs someone to help her fight Dracula. But I'm not worried about her being as taken over as I was before. I think she's ready to kick his ass, and I'm really ready for it again. Vanessa was so powerful at the end of season 2 before Ethan ditched her ass. I'm ready for her to, kick some ass and take some names again. So it was really great to see her, powerful and strong and grabbing Dr. Seward's hand and being I know who this person is, and I know what I need to do. And I think a lot of that also comes from the fact that she knows who John is to her now, too. So I think that's also a really positive thing. So going forward, obviously I think next episode, we may not see Vanessa at all. I think it's going to be devoted a lot more to Ethan's story. And hopefully we'll get a lot more on Ethan's backstory, because I think, again, this show desperately needs it. I need more of it. I think we're also going to get more of Victor. It seems like Victor is going to be playing with electricity again, like he does. So I think hopefully we're going to be moving the Victor and Jekyll story forward. And probably not seeing too much of Vanessa, as we gave a lot of the storyline, we gave all of the story of this episode to her, the whole hour to her. This episode. So that was Blades of Grass, and again, I'm sorry I teared up. This episode meant a lot to me, as you guys I think can well tell. I hope you enjoyed this. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe. And again, I am Lindsay with When Nerds Attack, and this has been Dreadfully Yours.